We are joined right here on Diaspora Daybreak by a man leading that charge right here at home and abroad. He is the president of the unia-acl Jamaica, and the one and only Stephen Golding. Good morning to you, sir.
Morning, Markland. Morning.
How are you doing, sir?
Here yet, but I know it's morning somewhere.
Indeed. Bring us up to speed, sir. What's the latest as we observe its 139th anniversary?
Let me say this, Markland. August 17th is perhaps my busiest day each year.
Wow.
Let me wish your listeners a great Garvey Day. There's so many activities going on today, both in Jamaica, in our diaspora, and around the world. In fact,
right.
I was just on the line with Akwa Ibom State in Nigeria, where they are preparing to host for the first time their Marcus Garvey Awards this year.
Okay. Awesome.
Many might remember that for almost a decade we did the UNIA Marcus Garvey Awards in Jamaica up until 2022, I think was the last one. And over the last couple of years, we have taken it international. And so this year it is going back to Africa, and it will begin in another 4 hours or so in Nigeria. Of course, they are about 6 hours ahead of us.
Right.
So we do want to let you know that you have become, for me, the first activity of this great Garvey Day this year.
Wow.
And of course, the annual wreath-laying ceremony at National Heroes Park will commence at 9 a.m. today. And after that, we'll be heading to St. Anne's Bay to host the annual civic ceremony that is done by the mayor and the St. Anne Municipal Corporation. We have some special guests with us this year, including the grandson of Marcus Garvey, the eldest grandchild, Mr. Colin Garvey himself. There's also Dr. David Mohammed, who is here from Trinidad, who is the representative of the Honorable Louis Farrakhan in the Eastern Caribbean and also the chairman of the National Library Service in Trinidad. He will be the guest speaker in St. Anne's Bay today. And of course, later this evening in Kingston in Tivoli Gardens, well, across from Tivoli Gardens in Denham Town at Nation Lounge, Dr. Omar Johnson is also on the island to commemorate this great Garvey Day. So, yeah, man, it's going to be a full day of activity, and we're happy to start here on RJR 94 with the action man himself.
Awesome, I'm so honored to really start this relay, and then we'll pass the baton over to, as you mentioned, to Nigeria, and then we come back to Jamaica over there in St. Anne's Bay, the birthplace of this great man. When you hear all that's happening today, I mean, the world comes alive, Jamaica comes alive today to honor the work and legacy. But I mean, if Marcus Garvey should walk into a classroom today, or were he to walk in on a radio station or a television station, you think he'd be proud of where we are as it relates to his teaching and his legacy?
No, there's so much more we should have accomplished by this time, given the fact that, you know, he was born 139 years ago. He left this earthly dispensation some 86 years ago. So we're looking at almost a century since Marcus Garvey, left us in the flesh. And I think, Garvey did so much in such a short period of time. I mean, at the height of the UNIA under his leadership, we're talking about between 1914 and 1925 when he was wrongfully imprisoned by the U.S. federal government. But he did so much in that short period. I'm sure he would look back and say, well, what have we done for the over 8 decades he hasn't been around? In terms of his teachings, we have to remember, that there was a massive sort of smear campaign against Garvey. while he lived and immediately following his death in 1940. We did not make him a national hero in Jamaica until 1964. This is about a quarter of a century after he passed. And when he was alive, after being imprisoned wrongfully and deported back to Jamaica, we too threw him in prison in 1929. Shortly after he formed the country's first modern political party, the People's Political Party, and contested for a seat in Parliament for the parish of St. Andrew. The colonial powers at the time were so afraid, not only of Garvey here in Jamaica, but across the world, and particularly in Africa, where they took all measures to make sure that Garvey was not allowed to step foot on African soil after he had formed the largest confraternity, the largest mass movement of African descendant people ever in the world's history. He was a dangerous man to them because his teaching and philosophy represented a form of liberation that Garvey promised would lead us to economic power, would lead us to nationhood, would redeem Africa and put Africans back at the global seat, which they created eons ago when we built the first civilizations, when we built the pyramids and the Sphinx and the great wonders of the world, when we taught Europe and the Greeks and the Romans reading and writing and arithmetic. So Garvey said in his own thesis in 1925, when we had reduced the heavenly constellations to minute and regular calculus, the European or the Caucasian was still living in caves with rats, bats, and other insects. Those are his words. So Garvey fully understood the Africans' story, our true story, not his story that they give us. And he understood how powerful we were as a people, but he also understood the damage that was done by the invasion of Africa, by the kidnapping, trafficking, and enslavement of Africa, and really by the African Holocaust, which we use the Swahili term for, the Maafa, which coincidentally, Markland, this year, 2026, marks 500 years exactly since the first slave ship left the coast of Africa, trafficking Africans to the Americas, right? The enslavement of Africans had begun before that, but the first set of Africans that had been brought to the Americas came on ships from Europe. It was in 1526 that the Portuguese first piloted and navigated trafficking Africans from the coast of Africa to the Americas, and the first port that they were taken to, of course, was Brazil. In the case of the United States of America, they often speak about the history of enslavement. In fact, I saw one congressman putting a motion to have August 20th, I believe, declared U.S. Slavery Remembrance Day. And that was based on the fact that was around the date that they say the first Africans arrived on the banks of the James River in Virginia in 1619 from what is now today known as the nation of Ghana. But that is in fact erroneous, because if we check our history, and your listeners can go and Google and ask the AI, the first enslaved Africans taken to what is now the United States of America came in 1526 to what is now somewhere between the border of Georgia and South Carolina in an area called Sapelo, right? And people may know the Sapelo Island, St. Simons, the Gullah Geechee people. This was the first place 100 enslaved Africans were taken to America in October 1526, but it is not kept in their history books because those Africans rejected chattel slavery, right? Revolted or rebelled. Those are the terms the Europeans use, but I like to say liberated themselves, right? From their so-called masters, and integrated themselves with the Native American population. So this year, when the United States was celebrating 250 years of independence, Africans in America, or African Americans or people of African descent in America, should have actually been celebrating 500 years of the presence of Africans in America, beginning with that first slave trip, that first trip of the slave ship in 1526.
Indeed, lots to chew on right there, But it seems as if, based on all that we've been hearing over the years and what you just shared with us, that Marcus Garvey was a threat. He was really a threat to colonialism and, of course, white supremacy, and even to really liberating black people and to be that force to reckon with. And hence the smear campaign, and hence the imprisonment, not only overseas but also here in Jamaica. And but today we see where the U.S. administration recently issued a pardon for Garvey, which many activists argue falls short of the full exoneration. And of course, UNI itself has fought for what. But what is the next concrete step you think the movement should take to really set the historical record straight when it comes on to Marcus Garvey?
First of all, Garvey says that people without knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without. The U.S. government under Joe Biden issued a posthumous pardon for Marcus Garvey in 2025. It was last year, January. But people must remember that Garvey got his own pardon in 1927 from U.S. President Calvin Coolidge. And I wonder why people often overlook that. Garvey was convicted of mail fraud in 1923. He was sentenced to 5 years, the maximum sentence that could be given for that conviction. He was put on trial with 5 people. He was the only one convicted and given the maximum sentence. He was convicted on one single count, right? With one single piece of evidence, which happened to be an empty envelope and the testimony of a man by the name of Benny Dancy. Now, we know from 1919 that J. Edgar Hoover, who was then at the Bureau of Investigation, not yet the head, but working at the Bureau of Investigation, which later became the Federal Bureau of Investigation, had written a memo pointing to the fact that Garvey, as a quote-unquote Negro agitator, was dangerous, and that he had committed no crime at that point, but that they were looking in earnest to find a means, a reason, and a way to deport him. Right. That was 4 years before they charged him with mail fraud. The reason they charged him in 1923 was that in 1921, the only time he left the U.S. while he was sojourning there, and he left to come to the Caribbean on a stock-selling tour with the Black Star Line, which brought him to Cuba, Jamaica. He went on to Costa Rica, Panama, Belize, even Guatemala. While he was away, the Bureau of Investigation tried to interfere, with the U.S. consulate to prevent them from issuing a visa for Garvey's return to the United States. So what should have been a 2-week tour turned out to be a 3-month tour. So Garvey realized at that point that something was afoot. So Garvey, being the giant that he was at that time, was able to contact the U.S. Secretary of State, who did not appreciate the Bureau of Investigation interfering or sort of overstepping their bounds. He had a visa issued to him, and he was allowed to return to the U.S. through the port of New Orleans. But when he returned, Garvey, being as astute as he was, immediately filed for U.S. citizenship. Now, the Bureau of Investigation couldn't allow for that citizenship to go through before they found something to charge him and convict him with. Because remember, their ultimate goal was deportation. And what happens to Jamaicans who are charged with a crime in the U.S.? You serve your time and you are immediately deported.
Deported, right.
You're a U.S. citizen. You will serve your time, but you are not deported. So this is what sort of sped up the Bureau of Investigation and led them to do a sloppy job, right? So so Garvey, even since his time, has pointed out the fact that his trial was unfair. He was set up. I mean, even at the conclusion of the trial, the 9 jurors later wrote to the U.S. president asking for leniency and clemency for Garvey. And he testified that the judge in the case had sort of bullied them into coming back with a guilty verdict. So, you know, it's a classic case of injustice, so to speak.
Yes,
so
yes.
Nonetheless, because the issue was deportation, Garvey's own efforts bore fruit in the fact that U.S. President Calvin Coolidge in 1927 issued a pardon to Garvey. Remember, he should have served his time until 1930, but he was released in November of 1927 after, a little more than 2.5 years in prison. But the caveat in that pardon was immediate deportation. So when I responded in 25 that, this pardon by Joe Biden was cosmetic surgery, I was alluding to the fact that it is the second time Garvey is receiving a pardon. And the fact is that we do not want a pardon. What we need is an exoneration. We need the U.S. government to admit that they know what Edgar Hoover did was wrong, that Garvey was set up, that he was targeted, that he was wrongfully prosecuted. And we know this by their own documents and the number of FBI files that have been sort of released to the public since that time. But you cannot get an exoneration from a U.S. president. It can only be done by the judiciary, who cannot do it because their process of doing it is to re-examine the case. Now, it's been too long to re-examine that case. Everybody's dead. The evidence is gone. But it can also be done by an act of Congress. And Charlie Frank, who was the congressman for Harlem, began this process in 1980. It got shelved. It fell off the table. And what has happened since 2025 is that the Jamaican congresswoman, Yvette Clark, who succeeded her mother, Una Clark, as a congresswoman for Brooklyn, has sort of resurrected this effort to get the Congress to exonerate Garvey. And the first step was to get a president to issue a second pardon. I suppose she did it to bring the issue back to the forefront. So we did congratulate her in it, but we want the public to know that this is a process. It is not the finality of it. And the second pardon doesn't really mean anything because Garvey was able to secure his own pardon while he was in prison.
Indeed. So all things are possible. It might just be a longer road to see this exoneration come to existence. But until then, I guess the fight will just continue. Now, here in Jamaica, we often talk about Garvey's legacy, but critics say his philosophies are left out of the modern classrooms. What immediate policy or educational shift needs to happen to really, get the Garvey philosophy, get Garveyism entrenched into our schools? And I mean, starting from a tender age as from the prep school, primary school level.
I'm glad you asked that question, Markland, because what we have been saying for over 2 decades is, how can teachers teach something that they themselves have never been taught?
Interesting.
So what the approach that we have taken since 2004 is to seek to develop within the teacher training institution Garvey studies department that can begin to integrate the teachings of Garvey into their curriculum, so that in training can be exposed to it, and then will have it, will be able to avail themselves of those lessons when they themselves are in the classroom. Now,
Right.
we call it Garveyism. But what is Garveyism? Garveyism is not the history or biography of Marcus Garvey. Indeed, if you go into a class to tell people that Garvey was born in 1887, he said this, he did that, and he died in 1940, you're not teaching Garveyism. You're teaching history. Right?
Right.
Garveyism is the philosophy that underpins what Garvey founded. Now, some people call that Pan-Africanism. Some people call that black nationalism. Some people call it African nationalism. Garvey himself called it universal African nationalism. And that is a philosophy that can be taught across a variety of subjects, from math to English to geography to history. I can keep going. Now, a man might say to me, but Stephen, how do you teach? How can Garveyism be taught in mathematics, which is, a universal language? I asked them, did you pay attention in your math class, Markland?
Not as much as I should, eh?
But you do recall they taught you Pythagoras' theorem, right?
Yes, go ahead. Continue.
Who is Pythagoras? Pythagoras was a Greek, I guess you want to call him mathematician, right? Who went to Egypt and learned from the people who built the pyramid a mathematical theory that he brought back to Greece, and put his own name on it. Pythagoras never built one pyramid in his entire life. But before he could even read or write, a man in Egypt named Imhotep built the first pyramid. He also became the father of medicine, but he is the grandfather of mathematics. Now, why is it that in our classroom we want to teach our children Pythagoras' theorem without mentioning to them the fact that this is really Imhotep's theorem? You follow what I'm saying here?
Yeah, I'm following you. I'm following you for sure.
Now, philosophy is the foundation of learning. Philosophy permeates every subject matter. And that is why in mathematics, you will learn that we use a number system that is Arabic, and we will learn certain mathematical principles from people like Pythagoras and Isaac Newton and Albert Einstein. Now, mathematics would mean that we reclaim the African presence in that subject matter and the contributions of the Africans to the development of mathematics, because when we read the history books of the Greeks themselves, they did not lie. They wrote in their history books that the foundation of education for them was found in the Egyptian and African civilizations, which they visited and learned from. In fact, they reckon the Ethiopians and Egyptians were closer to their gods than they themselves were. Now, those elements are what Marcus Garvey was speaking about when he said little things like, when you don't know your history, you're going to be a tree without roots. Those elements are what he referred to when he says we had reduced the heavenly constellations, that what you see today are duplicates of a grander civilization that the African reflected thousands of years ago. This is how we teach Garveyism in the classroom. And so we have been working we have been working very hard to get this framework established in the teacher training colleges. We've established Garvey clubs at the different teacher colleges, including Michael, Sam Sharp. We've had clubs at Bethlehem. We've had clubs at Shortwood, even at Case, at Monique College. But what we ultimately want is for each teacher training institution to create a Garvey Studies department so that we can begin to infuse Garveyism across the curriculum spectrum. Garveyism in music, Garveyism in literature, Garveyism in religion, Garveyism in history. You follow me?
Because there's a space and a place for his teaching indeed, and his philosophies.
Well, the fact is that Greek and Roman philosophies underpin every subject in our curriculum right now, because we have a curriculum that has come handed down to us from our European colonizers. Garvey said we have to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. It means we've got to begin to believe that what our colonizers teach us is not the supreme truth. And the fact is, the more we scratch and dig at it, we'll find that it is stolen knowledge. It is a stolen legacy that they have stamped their own signature on, right? So we want to dust off those things. For example, I will be speaking out in St. Anne's Bay today to a group of well, it's open to the public at the St. Anne's Bay Parish Library at 12:30. But we've specially invited early childhood educators to come and receive a copy of the new Daddy Marcus nursery rhyme book so that they can have it at their basic school. And
how is that going for you?
It's going great. On Friday, we handed over a number of copies to the Early Childhood Commission for distribution. For your listeners, you know, the Daddy Marcus nursery rhymes is a play on Mother Goose nursery rhymes. And what we've done is taken a look at the nursery rhymes that we are teaching our children in basic school. And this is very important, Markland, because you learn, early childhood education teaches you things at such a critical stage in your life that you never forget those lessons even until you're 9900 years old and approaching your grave. Right? If I say something right now, you know he sat on the wall. If I say black sheep, you're gonna ask, you're gonna ask, have you any wool? Because
well, that's right.
Taught to you at an age, but what we uncovered is not only the fact that these nursery rhymes are 200-300 years old and were written at a time when our own ancestors were being enslaved by the very people who were authoring these nursery rhymes, but we've also uncovered that they contain subliminal seeds of white supremacy that we continue to plant into the consciousness of our children even today in the 21st century. Baba Black Sheep, have you any wool? Yes, sir, 3 bags full. 1 for the master, 1 for the dame, and 1 for the little boy who lives down the lane. Well, who is the master? And who is the dame?
Right.
And you know the little boy is not their son because he don't live in the great house with them. He lives down the lane. And what is the lane from the great house? The slave.
I tell you. Sir Stephen, we could go on and on this morning. No wonder we can borrow from the words of Marcus Garvey. Intelligence rules the world, ignorance carries the burden, and the pen is mightier than the sword, but the tongue is mightier than both put together. So much to unpack this morning, and I tell you, we're gonna need maybe a sit down in studio, and we go through and of course even encourage our listeners calling in, because I know for sure that they do have questions of their own, but we want to commend you for the work that you've been doing, leading the charge, and of course keeping Garvey's aim alive and well, and of course even for your own publishing of Daddy Marcus nursery rhymes, where we can start getting our children, to learn. We have to, we said, reprogram, for want of a better term, or children when it comes down to nursery rhymes. And as you mentioned, we have to get the teachers in training, start learning the Garveyism so they themselves can teach, because as I said, they can't teach what they don't know. So again, we commend you for keeping the legacy and the fight going.